keep the schedule and the very well organized program. I hope you had a good rest last night, and let's hope that we have a wonderful day today. And if I look on the program, there are very promising lectures today. And we start with the first one. We start with the lecture, Religious Education and the Challenges of the African Political Reality. And this lecture is given by Gaston Ogui-Kossi. Welcome. He's a research full professor of Christology at the Faculty of Theology of the Catholic University of West Africa in Abidjan in Ivory Coast. He's also the director of research and cooperation at the same university. His topics of research are essentially the articulation between the universal and the concrete. Universal and the concrete, very interesting. Anthropology as a way of theology and interculturality as a new paradigm of interculturation. He published a book, congratulations to this. His last book is Réflexions inculturaires sur les vertus théologiques. We're looking forward to your lecture very much. The floor is yours, please.
Thanks a lot, Bernard. And I want to start my lecture greeting all of you and thanking the organizer of our symposium. I mentioned Sister Professor Anna, Professor Jean-Paul. Thank you for bringing me in this place. For me, it's a pleasure to start here this morning and to talk about this topic. It's a topic which is very important for me. I will try to make you understand what I prepare, even if my English is not good. Okay. So, you have these pictures. It's not syncretism. Two symbols of our religions. I will comment on it later. But before all, I want to present to you my plan. One introduction, I'll make a radioscopy of the political reality in Africa, the ambivalence and ambiguity in the behavior of African political leaders, witchcraft behaviors, and the second point will be two antithetic ways of our religion's education in Africa, education based on the research of science and the education for the management of pathos of life. I will try to explain all that for you. And the third part will be the reconstructing religious education, the challenge of cultural identity, and the challenge of otherness, conclusion, and it will be the end of my lectures. First point. Yeah, it's correct. No problem. I will not try to explain all that those topics for you, because you know that I put them to say that when I was given of this topic, I asked myself some question. Religion education. What kind of a religion? Catholic religion traditional religion, the contribution of Catholic religion or education, or the endogenous religions and traditional religions, their contribution to education is those questions that I met before I begin my reflection. As you know, the African political landscape reveals gaps between the legitimate expectation of the people and the spectacle offered by African political actors. While with the advent of democracy in Africa around 1990, people thought we were entirely free of the tyranny. The 21st century seemed to be returning to the political of constitutional revision and their consequences. Push violence in many countries like Burkina Faso, Republic of Guinea, Republic of Mali, and so forth and so on. One can ask, whose turn is? What kind of a political education led our countries in such a situation? That's my question. The legitimate question that many are asking is the quality of the education received by these actors of African political scene of yesterday and today. Related to this question is the place of our religion in the education. In other words, can religious education help to meet the challenges posed by the African political reality of today? My heuristic hypothesis is that religious education should be retaught so that it can provide the African society and political scene with a new type of citizen. Our method will be phenomenological, inductive, and deductive. First part of my lecture, the radioscopy of the political reality in Africa. I'll go quickly because it's a problem that you know, all of you. From the observation of the African political scene, we can deduce that everything happens as if there were an epistemological short circuit in the action of political actors. Indeed, the African political scene is characterized by ambivalent or even ambiguous behavior on the one hand and witchcraft behavior on the other. What is this ambivalence and ambiguity in the behavior of African political leaders? Free in principle from superstition, behavior by the classical education, Catholic education, Muslim education, African political leaders do not hesitate to call to help to marabouts and gurus in political games. We have in our country a phenomenon called Baname phenomenon. Is a young girl who declared herself God, Almighty God, and she tried to convoke people even the political leaders of our country for a celebration and for a conference. This is not an isolated case in Ivory Coast. Some people have attributed, rightly or wrongly, the refusal of Laurent Gbagbo to give up power when everything pointed to his apparent failure in the war that opposed him to Alassane Ouattara. Why? Because he has received the promise that he will be the winner. Therefore, the slogan of the Gbagbo and his militants was, "We will win or we will win." The truth is that the interference of the regions in in Africa is nothing less than the result of an education which doesn't consider the socio-cultural reality in which the actors of the African political life are immersed. It is therefore, are you following me? It is therefore understandable that many of them who declare themselves Christian or Muslim are now part of esoteric and sectarian groups. The consequence is the witchcraft behavior. What I mean by witchcraft behavior, it is recurrent to observe people who recur to witchcraft practices in most of African capitals. Really, witchcraft is a part of what some people call little secrets of palace. That means political actors who consider themselves as traditional kings try to be as powerful as traditional kings. It's indeed the conviction of Vincent Mulago, who maintained that in witchcrafts, the symbolized being is so present and united to the symbol in the operation order, at least, that it becomes possible for him to exert his action and influence as if space and time did not exist. I cannot explain this question of witchcraft more than that, because in reality, it's very complex, and if I will stay on this, we will lose a lot of time. If there are questions about this, I can explain. Second point of my lectures, two antithetical way of religious education in Africa. African political leaders are living in a kind of schizophrenia in terms of religious education. They have one food in tradition without understanding it, and claim to be totally free of tradition in favor of modernity, in which they continue to seek themselves. Hence, the agency of deconstructing the religious education in which African political actors are immersed in order to reconstruct it in a way that respects both their particular identity and their openness to others. Education based on the research of the sense, that is, the education proposed by Christianity or Catholic. Religious education in Christian context has its foundation in evangelical values that we know. Its vocation is to unite hearts and establish an order of justice and peace. The heart of the mission of Jesus Christ was obviously is love. By religious education, the Christian religion seeks the sense of life. Christian education courses are an answer to the question about the sense, the meaning of our humanity. Where did I come from? Where am I going? What can I do? The purpose of a Christian education is to lead the student to acquire, or disciples to acquire and develop the knowledge, skills, and abilities and values of Christianity in order to encourage him or her to live as disciples of Jesus Christ. Its essential objective can be summarized as follows: grow in faith, hope, and love, to better understand the principle of Christianity, to give oneself generously to the service of celebrating of love, be inspired by the teaching of Christ before making decisions in one's life, develop respect for humans who are all in the image of God. Second point of this point, education for the management of pathos. I called pathos all problem of our human existence. The great importance given to religion education in African culture is due to its collective and social characters. It is its intimate link with social life on both the material and spiritual level should also be stressed. Its multifaceted character, both in terms of objective pursuits and the means employed, its progressive and gradual realization in accordance with the success stage of a child's physical, psychological, and mental. Let me say that in this education, traditional or indigenous education, there is place for love, but one who receives education must be power. If you are not power, you didn't receive nothing. Moreover, education in political affairs has to claim in the African tradition to raise the individual to the level of a challenge that awaits him in a political and everyday life. In this new form of socialization, inherited from the West and from Christianity, the individual must prove his capacity to face the battles of existence. The fear of death thus appears as a sensitive fiber on which the new guru will play, such is also the conviction of Martin Ainadu when he writes, death being then perceived as the consequence of a supreme chastisement of the divinity, punishment of divinities. In wrath, the more a cult is surrounded by a mystery and which the specter of death, however, the more it frightens and gives fear. So, the main goal of traditional education is to help people and those who are engaged in political life to be strong and to be strong against the enemies, to face the enemies with capacity. Today, one of the most common motives for ritual crimes is the quest for wealth at any price. Thus, their religion that provides wealth and power to their followers in exchange of human organs or simply for crime against certain categories of individuals. Thus, the blood of a young virgin, the hump of a hunchback, or the limb of an albinos are sought after. Can seek for that. What to mean? Edward tried to summarize all that. In this quoting, he said, you know, today in our countries, like Ivory Coast, Benin, and in other countries, we have a lot of new communities who try to bring to people and to political leaders what they need as a power, as a wealth. And he can say that it's what the first missionary didn't do that these new communities try to do today. And he said, what is being revested here in what the first missionary left out by privileging the path of the search for meaning, the path of the search for power. It is in this perspective that we find today a revival of the traditional practice on the axis of far labor, but in reality, the search for meaning and power is transversal to the axis of religion and the axis of romantic. That means when the first missionary arrived in Africa, they say, no, you just have to pray, you have to love, you have to, but they forgot that in our culture there are problems. They didn't affront these problems. It's what we are saying here. So a good education must try to understand this. Well, it's the same idea, so we can pass through this. The third part of my lecture is my proposal to reconstruct religious education for a new political order in Africa and in the world. We are dealing here with an interpellation that religious education. We are dealing here with an interpellation that religion education throws at us. Two essential challenges defy the contemporary African political reality. The first challenge is the challenge of identity. The second challenge is a challenge of otherness, alterity. Challenge of cultural identity. It is a question here of being fully oneself in order to be efficient on the political scene. This supposes that religious education integrates all the values proper to the individual to be a political actor of tomorrow. In order to be oneself, it is important to establish a good individual representation. That it's a thought that I received from one of our philosophers, Ishaq Laleye Prosper, who tried to explain that if we wanted to have people who can engage themselves in life, political life, social life, religious life, we have to help them to build what he called the personality. We have to help them to have a good representation. The element of experience in such a representation, the elements of experience are kept in perspective with one another, and the whole is oriented in accordance with the mind's eyes. The past, present, and future no longer competed for the flow of consciousness. On the contrary, it is one and the same flow of consciousness that cross all three, but maintain each of them in the place assigned to it by will. Here, it's a thought of one called Roland Gori in a book that you read perhaps, La Fabrique des Imposteurs. La Fabrique des Imposteurs. What he suggests is how to be very far from this kind of behavior, people who don't want to work. Education should aim at valuing the end rather than the means, at promoting citizens who value substance over form, who rely on work and courage rather than on appearance and reputation, who prefer merit to popularity, who opt for courage and the ideal rather than for advantageous pragmatism, who choose to stand firm on the virtues rather than opportunistical follow opinion, who cherish critical thinking rather than semblance of its values. It's in La Fabrique des Imposteurs of Roland Gori. The last part of my comments is the challenge of otherness, or challenge of alterity. The complexity of contemporary world requires from African a spirit of hopeness that excludes the claustration in the particular and the dilution in the universal, in order to achieve the new social order built on the new brotherhood. All political actors are invited to work so that every culture is respected in its difference and specificity as a proper place of a human being. Laleye proposed that from individual representation we can move to a collective representation. By conclusion, we will be a little wide. In all our education, that's my proposal, especially religious, it is important to integrate the pathos of existence into all our discourses. In order to take up the great challenges that the African political reality throws at us, we suggest a recourse to the fundamentals of African religious education, which are initiation and covenant. I suggest also that we have an openness spirit. The first pictures I put is to explain that we have to accept one another, not only our cultures, but even our religions. We have to accept that we don't need to be syncretists, but we have to respect people in their difference. Provide an efficient andragogy for adults by encouraging the existing training centers such as the ERGP is a place where political actors are formed in Benin, Cotonou, and SERAP is another where they are formed in Abidjan. Provide an appropriate pedagogy for youth and even children. In this sense, awaken them to the significant symbol of the nation in Africa. Here. And in addition to the symbol of countries whose importance for the emergence of a new order must be constantly recalled, the vocation of the deeds of true African national heroes can contribute to incite and excite children and youth to pursue the same ideal and behavior. That's what I want to share with you. Some selected books. Yeah, that's all done. Thanks for your attention.
Good morning. Thanks a lot, Gaston, for this very inspiring lecture, which reminds me on my own perspective to combine the universal and the concrete and the pedagogy of local heroes. That was your last slide.
Yeah.
Stay there for questions. The floor is yours. If you want to raise some questions, please.
Thank you very much, Professor, for all of what you have said. As a missionary, I am interested in, well, you were talking about groups who are coming in to bring what first missionaries did not bring. Who are those groups? Are they maybe like charismatic movements, or it's to do with education? Because I know if you are talking about witchcraft or Abarangi, in Uganda, the charismatic movement, they did a lot. They are doing a lot to change minds of the people. I was saying about Abarangi in Banyankore. Abarangi are those spirits of ancestors, yeah? So they are now more and more trying to get rid of it. Although deep in African nature, it's there. But still people are calling priests like to come to say mass. They burn those things that they were using for worshiping their ancestors, their ancestors. But I'm interested now about who are those groups you were talking about.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, sister. Yeah, the group I talk about are especially what I call new communities, but the roots are charismatic group, because in Abidjan now we have more than 100 of new groups. And the goal is, first, as you said, to try people to free themselves from witchcraft. That's the most important topic, witchcraft. There's I say there are exaggeration, there are sure real problem, but sometimes there are exaggeration, because there's men, women everywhere, and all the days. That's not right on my consent. But I believe in God. I noticed that really there are problems that we can call un phénomène, comment on appelle, phénomène that we can explain. We can't explain, we can't understand, we can't. There are problems like this, but I'm not so sure that it is useful to try to see which people everywhere. But the work are very useful for people who is living in fear of others, fear of life, fear of sickness, fear that it's all that I call the pathos of life. Yeah. So it's the same thing, sister.
Thank you.
Okay.
Other question?
Thank you very much, Professor Gaston. It is a very exciting lecture. I would like to point out some points, some ideas. The first one is this kind of the place of power, the relationship between religion and the power in Africa. Yeah, I think there is a link between traditional African religion and the image which has been brought by the first missionaries.
Yeah.
This idea of power has continued, has been maintained by the first missionaries, because African people saw missionaries and European colonials as people who have power. Mm-hmm. And that, in this case, in this sense, Christianity, Catholic Church, African understand Catholic Church in the same conception of African religions. The idea of power. You are a priest, you are a power man. And this kind of power as something which continues from the African religions and Christianity, it is a challenge for religious education. That is the first one. The second idea that I retained from your lecture is this connection that you have to do in religious education, not to prepare like it has been done in the history of the church in Africa for another world after the life, to teach people how they can be happy in the heaven. Now we have to make this link, this to integrate the social pathos, like you said, in religious education. I think that is something which is very, very interesting. Now my question.
Yeah.
my question is, searching for power, and you propose now searching for meaning. Huh? I think the meaning is another form also of power. When you are instructed, when you are well educated, you have some power. But this power must be a power which has to be in favor, in the service of others, not the power of ourselves. I think that is the matter. How now? How? When we know that in Africa, people are very poor, as you say, they have fear of, they don't know if they will eat. They don't know if their children will be educated. They don't know if they will, how to pass from the power of, the search of power to the search of meaning in the society, in African society, which is very, very suffering from different problems, different pathos. I liked that concept of pathos.
Okay. Thanks, Jean-Paul. Yeah, you are right. I haven't time to. I noticed that it is already very long what I say, but I let many things apart because I would like to express this connection between power and religion, taking an example of some kind of president, of bishop in my country, to tell that, we missed something because the evangel, the good news we receive from Christ is not what we try to reproduce. What we try to reproduce is what you know about mentality of king of in our culture. Is for that, my concern is that we need to purify all that and to tell people that, as you say, that's the second point of your question, that we have to search for a meaning. I read some books about witchcraft. One of our researchers said witchcraft not exist. Another said it exists. In the two books who were published in the same edition, to say that the man who said that witchcraft doesn't exist want to try to explain that what we called witchcraft is our fear. Is because we can't reflect, and he said what we can receive from the Occident, the Western, is that they try to dominate what themselves, I don't know if I'm wrong, themselves called witchcraft. Sometimes today they dominate it and they don't fear. If there is a sickness, you can know from where comes this sickness. But if you have a problem, you just say it's witchcraft. So we have to help people to combine searching for meaning and searching for power. But the power wrote an article that entitled like this: Autorité sacrée en cité. Autorité sacrée. To say that the image of authority and power that we have to look at is Jesus. Jesus, who was so powerful with his Father and humbled himself, becoming our servant, is what we need to try to reproduce. It's not easy, but that's the way he. But what I can say, we can continue reflection about this.
Regarding the schedule, there's just one question that's.
Thank you, Father Gaston, for your very interesting lecture. You are professor of Christology.
Yeah.
And I suppose it is very exciting to teach Christology in Africa.
Of course. It's the heart of our theology. Christology is the heart of a theology.
Especially in the perspective of inculturation. But relating with what we are talking about, you emphasized the importance of power in Africa. And one of the most important concept of Christianity is the weakness of God in Jesus Christ. The weakness of God. God became human. He became humble, you said. He became weak. He died on the cross. St. Paul calls that kenosis.
Kenosis, yeah.
So my first question is how it is possible to conciliate the concept of power in the traditional African thought with the concept of kenosis in the perspective of the inculturation. This is my first question.
Okay.
And the second one, can you explain the concept of Ubuntu, which is very popular in South Africa? It means, as I know, humanity, fraternity. And how would you link this concept with the concept of fraternity in Christianity, especially, for instance, with the concept of fraternity which promote the Pope Francis? Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks. I think Jean-Paul gave us the way of understanding power as a service. Yeah. Because if I try to put to underline problems, because we want to reflect. But in reality, we have it's for that I finish my lecture saying that we have to present the example of the first king we have in Africa. All kings were not divinities. They are people who gave themselves to their people. We have a lot in Benin, in Rwanda, in Ivory Coast. We have people like this. And for me, it's such a person who can help us to understand that one who is powerful is one who is able to serve themselves, his people, who is ready to serve, who is able to humble himself. That is the very power. This is the very power. I don't know why we let such of example, and today we are running before power, who is domination, who is I don't know, because we have a lot of good example in Africa who humbles themselves to show us that power might be service. Okay?
Can I just remark, thank you very much. You know that one of the first Christologies were the Christologies of Jesus Christ as servant of God.
Yeah.
Not as only son, but servant of God.
Yeah.
And the service can be very useful interreligious concept.
Of course.
With the dialogue with Islam. In Quran, Jesus is the servant of God. So to have the model of service to other people can be very, very incentive to think about that. Thank you.
I agree with you. I agree with you for that. Ubuntu, I think Jean-Paul knows better than me. But as you say, the concept is the concept of humanity. For us, humanity is to try to understand other like you are yourself. To not. It's true that St. Paul said, no more Jew, Greek, woman, men, but we are different. We are different. But if you are different, differences are not problem for union. I don't know if you understand. But difference might help us to be together. And if I respect your culture, you respect my culture. If I respect your religion, you respect my religion. We can build a world of justice and peace. It's what means humanity. And thank you for mentioning the concept of fraternity. There are a priest who served in our country. His name is Michel Dujarier, who wrote 2 books about the church as a fraternity. I prefer this concept to concept of family. Family, I understand, it's good for us, but fraternity for me is more important than, yeah. So I agree with you. It's the way we can continue our theology and we can build a human of justice and rights. Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot. Now we have to change.
Yeah.
The lectures. Okay, you're ready to go? I think it's not necessary to introduce to you Professor Thea Filipovic.
Okay.
She's a professor here in Zagreb and head of the Department of Religious Education and Catechetics. Her research interest focuses on various aspects of religious education, as we had assumed. Including the interpretation of the Christian faith on the horizon of the issues of the contemporary world and societies, which leads us to your lecture now. Please, we are looking forward to your lecture.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you very much. We are changing from Africa to Europe, and I ask your patience because I will just read my paper because my English is not sufficient for speaking freely. We will start with some introduction and then speak about education for responsible citizenship and religious education, and then on the different concepts of civic education and about the didactic aspects. The school, as a social institution, mediates the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that students need to develop as individuals to get to know and understand the world in which they live, and to live responsibly in society. These goals of education were summarized by the International Commission for the Development of Education in the 21st century under the leadership of Jacques Delors in its report to UNESCO in the form of the 4 pillars to which all education should contribute. These, meanwhile, widely quoted pillars are learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. All school subjects, including religious education, contribute to these goals of education. An important reason for learning religion at school, both learning about one's own religion and about other religions and worldviews, is training for living together in a democratic society. This reason has been particularly evident in the last 20 years in the Council of Europe documents. It was established in 1949 to protect and promote human rights, pluralist democracy, and the rule of law. Its educational activity focuses on human rights education in close connection with education for democratic citizenship and intercultural dialogue. After the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States, the religious dimension gained a prominent place in education as well. Since then, the Council of Europe resolutely turned away from the French negative concept of secularity, which excludes religion from the public and defines it as a private matter, toward a positive understanding of secularity and religious neutrality, which perceives the public dimension of religion and the importance of religious education in the public space of the school. This requires cooperation with all relevant social groups, such as religious communities and parents of students. Promoting intercultural and interreligious dialogue, promoting a positive view of diversity, and learning respect, openness, dialogue, and negotiation are among the priorities of education recommended by the Council of Europe. Religious education also plays a very important role in the process of learning how to treat others and those who are different, and how to understand and accept them. This element of the curriculum should include, for example, strategies for understanding different religious positions, encouraging tolerance for, not agreement with, different religious and secular points of view, education in human rights, citizenship and conflict management, and strategies to counter racism and religious discrimination in a diverse world. The last sentence is quoting Robert Jackson. In order to achieve the stated goals, religious education cooperates with other subjects, areas, and disciplines. When it comes to Catholic schools, religious education in these schools also mediates knowledge, skills, and attitudes that enable students to think and to act responsibly in terms of religion and belief, and to shape their own religious attitude. Learning religion, learning about religion, and learning through and from religion, depending on the composition of students in these schools, serves both the personal and social development of students. Since Catholic schools today in different parts of the world place special importance on the dialogue of church and society in relation to the commitment to the integral development of man and human community, religious education has an important place in achieving these goals. Citizenship education is part of the curriculum only in the democratic societies, but it is conceived in different ways based on different understandings of citizenship. These differences are related to both educational policy and educational practice. Curricula mostly conceive the civic competence as an interdisciplinary competence, so in many countries a cross-curricular approach to civic education is in force. It is realized through many subjects and school activities in which religious education always participates. Religious education and education for responsible citizenship are not only compatible but also mutually enriching. While citizenship education, for example, presents facts about the situation in a certain society as well as in the world, religious education introduces a specific perspective of its own based on the intrinsic social dimension of faith. I cite as example Evangelii Gaudium, chapter 4, that summarizes in a very strong way the social dimension of Christian faith, and the Christian vision of a peaceful, just, and inclusive world. This dimension is based on the relational understanding of God in Christian theology and the relational understanding of man in Christian anthropology. It is visible in the entire understanding of faith and the deep connection of love for God and for one's neighbor in the biblical faith and Christian tradition. The modern concept of active citizenship builds on the ancient Greek virtue of phronesis, which denotes critical discernment of or practical reason as a critical but cooperative responsibility, being response-able, as our colleague Bert Rubens says, for the social community polis in which an individual lives together with others. Traditionally, civic education has dealt with the political domain of one's own country. Today, the concept has been extended from the nation to wider regions and the whole world, as well as deepened so that in addition to political, it also includes social and cultural issues. In the wake of globalization as a process of enhanced, accelerated and increased connectedness and interdependence of people on Earth, which with its influence in meaning reshapes individual societies and the entire world order, today's societies face not only national problems and challenges, but also those with a global character. Issues of social inequality, social inclusion, and justice in the global world, which are addressed by political institutions, especially the United Nations, also come to the fore. The UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by member states in 2015, with 17 Sustainable Development Goals at its heart, as well as the UNESCO, emphasize the importance of education for global citizenship that should contribute to building a peaceful, just, inclusive, and sustainable society. By signing the agenda, these goals have entered many school curricula. The global dimension of citizenship depends on the state of multiculturalism and plurality in an individual society, but still most societies today extend the concept to the global dimension. However, since the UN does not discuss or address the tension tensions arising from the relationship between economy, ecology, and social issues in listing these goals of sustainable development, individual countries and their education systems differently shape and define the goals of global citizenship education. It is therefore necessary to critically confront the real possibilities of what global citizenship education can really achieve. Citizenship education is a normative concept because it is related to the moral values that characterize individual societies. Therefore, concepts such as citizenship and human rights are interpreted differently according to the political, economic, and cultural background. The learning of civic education is related to the moral development of students, based on empirical research among teachers, students, and parents on moral values, to which they attach special importance in the context of citizenship education. A Dutch researcher, Wil Veugelers, identifies three groups to which the three preferred type of nationally oriented citizenship correspond. The first type is adapted citizenship, in which teachers are focused on the education of character and moral behavior of students, which is achieved by discipline and norms. Some form of social involvement in school, family, and community also serves to this purpose. The second type is individualized citizenship, in which teachers put emphasis on empowering students to shape their own critical thinking, educate themselves in freedom, and develop autonomy in choices and ways of giving meaning to life, which, according to Lawrence Kohlberg, is a key level of moral development. In this group, teachers hold that moral values are a matter of an individual's personal choice, not a school task. That is why the social engagement of students is less important to them. The third type is critical democratic citizenship. It seeks to link moral values and autonomy. It focuses on recognition of differences and harmonious coexistence, and encourages students to engage in dialogue with different opinions and cultural backgrounds of argumentation. This emphasis is on critical analysis of topics and advocacy for the common good. Teachers in this group value social involvement and therefore tend to promote a wide range of social goals, from empathy to solidarity, based on social justice and a commitment to combating injustice in society. However, empirical research in the Netherlands has shown that many teachers like the critical democratic type of civic education, but in practice still applied less frequently than the adaptive type. It also turned out that teachers do not prefer the individualized type, but that it is at the same time quite anchored in the school system itself, which is focused on assessment, comparison, selection, and tracking of students. In addition to the above, in practice, there are, of course, many mixed or combined models. The concept of active citizenship and then of citizenship education has today expanded from the local and national community, from the polis to the cosmopolis. Veugelers' research therefore also points to three types of understanding of global citizenship and appropriate education. The first type is an open global citizenship education, which focuses on knowledge of and openness to other cultures. The second type is a moral global citizenship education, which has three goals in mind: creating conditions for the personal development of each person, caring for the planet and its inhabitants, and open communication in which everyone can participate. This approach is linked to human rights and the idea of cosmopolitanism. The third type is a socio-political global citizenship, which is dedicated to social justice, detection of unequal power relations, and political change. In this type, the influence of globalization on the articulation of the goals of civic and citizenship education is obvious. Proponents of this type accuse the previous, morally oriented type of not considering the political dimension of the power relations. Researchers find that teachers are more focused on the type of moral global citizenship education and avoid criticism of the politics, which not only seems risky to them, but they think that the school should not deal with it and must remain supposedly neutral. Civic education needs to find a balance between the promotion of human rights and democracy on the one hand, and economic equality, social justice, equal power relations, and respect for different cultures on the other side. Didactic approaches to citizenship education in religious education. Participating in the fulfillment of the tasks of education for responsible citizenship, religious education uses methods that are characteristic of the socio-humanistic group of subjects. Religious education mediates knowledge about human rights, community, and principles of community life, equality, justice, protection of human and civil rights of the weak, peace and responsible attitude towards other people, society, and creation, giving to these issues its own and specific content. The method of working with the text uses the text as a source. Biblical texts, texts from the Christian tradition, texts of church teaching, especially those related to Christian anthropology, social dimension of faith, and social doctrine of the church, but also those related to the theology of creation, ecumenism, dialogue with other religions, as well as to the history of present and present of the church, including a critical attitude towards its wounds and dark sides. Knowledge is imparted through important texts and supporting information, but also through testimonies and examples of the engagement of individuals and communities in the church for human rights, dialogue, justice, and peace. All of this can be transmitted also through movies, which are largely used in today's classes. But how to build attitudes, break down prejudices, accept personal responsibility for well-being of the community, for creating justice and peace in the world? In fact, knowledge can lead to different forms of action. Students often do not see the gap between their knowledge and their behavior, and not only the students. That is why motivation is important. Emotions and subjective norms play an important role in motivation. Movies and videos are an important source of information, but also an occasion for conversation and confrontations. Short films in the classroom can also serve as motivation and as a way to process or deepen the topic. Questions and tasks for working with the text and discussing the film should help to discover the potentials of faith as a resource for a successful life in the community and to identify barriers to participation and equality from a religious perspective, which are manifested as the structures of sin. Learning should be encouraged by seeking, analyzing, and evaluating information, which provides students with the experience that values are not imposed on them, but arise from insight and life experience. It is important that students question their experiences in dialogue with others, because dialogue plays an important role in learning. Students should learn from examples from everyday life and be encouraged to discover where they recognize that certain values and processes have been or have not been accomplished in their parish or other Christian communities. Rules of classroom behavior can also be developed with students to discuss the consequences of violating the rules with respect to addressing or insulting each other based on gender, physical appearance, origin, disability, and other characteristics, as well as the consequences of damaging other people's property, consequences to ecology, etc. Students can be encouraged to do their own individual or group research and present results in different ways, in form of posters, PowerPoint presentations, video, and similar media. In addition to getting information and mastering technical means of presentation, students will develop the ability to communicate and perform in public. With younger children, messages can be written related to respect of and the rights and needs of the child. The skills to be developed are focused on critical thinking, on ethical principles, and development of the communication skills needed for social and political participation. These are, above all, mediation knowledge, skills and values, the art of peacemaking and peaceful conflict resolution, the art of solving social problems through democratic principles. Communication process and negotiation skills prepare for successful action to identify problems in the community, research, propose solutions, and engage in various activities. According to Croatian citizenship education curriculum. These skills are encouraged through forms of group cooperative and experiential learning in and out of school, throughout which students will be able to learn about community participation and be encouraged to react to social exclusion. Students are brought into a situation where they need to describe, analyze, interpret, judge, and resolve moral and other doubts, relying on the democratic principles, which helps them become convinced of the correctness and effectiveness of their decisions through their own actions. Thus, they shape their own attitudes and critical thinking. The teacher prepares the materials, monitors the activities, and gives his review. Older students can also organize workshops on specific topics, such as gender equality or minority rights from a biblical perspective, etc. Active methods of learning and teaching serve to raise awareness of problems in society and the world, but also of one's own behavior. Among them, for example, the method of debate, which has an affirmation and negation group, and especially methods of drama pedagogy. As a form of experiential learning, these methods of drama pedagogy serve to encourage personal growth, especially when it comes to social issues, and serve to practice social skills, behaviors, procedures, and relationships. Many biblical pericopes provide role-playing opportunities for students to try to get into someone else's situation, such as parable of the Good Samaritan, the widow seeking help, the narrative of Zacchaeus' encounter with Jesus, the story of the prophet Nathan and King David, etc. Role-playing can also take place in a pantomime, then as a frozen scene or a stopped scene that vividly shows, for example, the attitude of the Pharisee and the attitude of the tax collector in the temple as an attitude towards God that has social repercussions. In a stage improvisation of a biblical text or some other text, the event, occasion, place, and time, characters and their motivations, as well as the mutual relationship, causes, and consequences of their actions are analyzed. Brainstorming is an exercise in which participants should get as many ideas, views, comments, titles, etc. On a given topic, or suggestions for solving a problem as soon as possible. Study visits to individual religious or social institutions can be organized as part of religious education, after which students write a report on the event. In Catholic schools, projects can also be organized. For example, peer learning assistance to students who have difficulty in learning or who come from other backgrounds, as well as social practice or service learning. Prepared, monitored, and evaluated students stay in social institutions in which religious education also participates. Photographs. We told yesterday, we talked about religious textbooks. Photographs in religious education textbooks, or those used in classes, visually convey information, evoke emotions, experiences, and relationships, and mediate values. The choice of photo motifs also requires responsibility and must meet the criteria of a dignified attitude towards the depicted persons, phenomena, and social groups, especially the vulnerable. This is evident, for example, when people of different social strata, members of other religions and worldviews, members of other races, peoples, genders, etc. are shown. Although many problems must be addressed structurally and politically, as they are based on issues of power, both religious education and school, the entire value system it promotes, that means the culture of the school, can contribute to education for responsible citizenship. They do this by encouraging one to think about one's own mechanisms of exclusion and to encounter otherness as an opportunity, as well as to engage in creating a more just local and global community. Faith thus becomes a resource for positive social change. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Professor Filipovic, for this inspiring lecture. If I hadn't been asked to be the moderator, I would ask the first question, but now, now the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you, Professor Filipovic, for this great lecture. I think you gave us an important overview of the main concepts, but also the most important part of it is what can we do in the practice, and we learn a lot about that today. I have 3 questions, if I may.
Even 3.
A few days ago, I read an article about the relation of intercultural education and globalization. The author, Agostino Portera, he mentioned that with this concept of globalization, we talk a lot about global knowledge, but that global knowledge mostly aim to the goals that are not related with the topics of, let's say, intercultural dialogue, but mostly about global economy. And he said that even if we aim to this global knowledge, sometimes that knowledge is quite culturally imperialistic. We will say about global language, but then we will all have to speak in English. So that features of individual or of one country, they seem to disappear. So he proposed the idea of intercultural education. You also mentioned this concept of global citizenship education and national. So my question is, how would you reconcile those 2 ideas in religious education of Croatia? What would be maybe the features of our nationality or our identity that could relate to global education, and how we can see it in religious education. Do you want me to ask the second question, or you want to respond first?
Okay, I can. Okay, I will start with the first. Regarding the globalization and the intercultural education and their place in religious education, it was talked in his aula about, I think you or someone else talked about the power relations present in the didactical trends, the individualized methods of learning and critical thinking and autonomy in the learning process is more favors the better educated children from better educated parents, from a better standard, and the children who comes from the lower social strata, they actually prefer the traditional forms of learning that could say something about that. Of course, the knowledge, only the knowledge of other cultures of the world and so on, is not sufficient. Oftentimes, people, and we also, as teachers, as professors, as religious education teachers, and so on, when we read something or hear something or discuss, we tend to affirm our own stances, our own attitudes. And it is not easy to change attitudes. They are changing very slowly. There are programs, for example, the anti-violence in these programs in schools, but they take time and involve all the aspects, not only the knowledge, but also the social learning, and it is not given that it will succeed. I think that covers this is imperialistic and culture and this area. And regarding the goals of national and global oriented citizenship education in Croatia and the part of religious education in fulfilling these tasks, I think in the past, when Croatia was not an independent state, the national oriented has the greater role. Now we must open to the world, to the globalized world. Although the processes of globalization are not are reversible. Nowadays we speak also of deglobalization, of the return to the local, to the small, and so on. The processes are mixed. Yeah, but I think in the biblical faith we have sufficient inspiration to open up to the whole world.
Second question.
The doctoral student.
They're always curious.
Thank you. No, the second one and the third one are much shorter. So they regard more the methods that you have mentioned, the dialogue, and in the last part you mentioned the skill of mediation. Regarding dialogue, since we have confessional religious education in Croatia, what do you think with whom the students can make that dialogue if we are all a homogeneous group? And second, and the third one is the skill of mediation. I think it's an important skill. I think even that this is a precondition skill for the method of dialogue, or at least they are complementary. But to whom do we let to form that skill in religion teachers? Is that depending only on their initiative and their will for learning, or institutions also should take responsibility for that? That's all.
Thank you, Mariam. Regarding the dialogue in the religious education classes, I think Tomislav talked yesterday about the concentric crisis of dialogue according to Ecclesiam Suam. And I think in classes, in normal classes, but also in religious education, it can be that the students are divided confessionally, but in the same confessional group, there are this group is also heterogeneous. It is not homogeneous as we assume. So we have also here different family backgrounds of the students regarding their religious socialization, different way of thinking of students itself. But in the future, when the society will change, we will also have more pluralist situation, and we will must to adapt our concept of religious education as well. Regarding the skills and training of skills, of course, I mentioned that at the end the structural conditioning of learning is always a frame that sometimes helps, but oftentimes also is an obstacle. So we can do something, but I see that I have a subject that students can choose social learning in religious education, and we try in this subject to do something also exercising practical skills, and students are very grateful for that. But that requires from the teacher a lot of activity and engagement to connect to other institutions. You know that also colleague Kovac regarding interreligious dialogue and so on, and making group work and so on, yes. Yeah, okay, thank you.
We have time for 2 questions of all and you.
Yeah, thank you very much, dear Anna. It is always a pleasure to listen to your lecture, very systematic and clear. I just have 2 small questions for my moderator. The first one is this introduction of citizenship education in religious education for in the church. We know that there is some colleagues or some bishops who are not who don't agree with this this option, and I would like to know what how to how to defend if this option, which I know some bishops who are not, who says no, this is not religious education. This is not our job. Yeah, that is the first one. The second is what does theology learn from this way of doing religious education, including this dimension of citizenship education? I think it is a new a challenge also for theology.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Paul. Regarding the citizenship education in the church, we must think that school was always political. In the past, during the dictatorship regimes, during the rulers who ordered what the school has to do, and religion entered into the school space, into the space of the school, and it managed somehow to reconcile the goals of educating good Christians and good citizens. Nowadays, above all, the role of religious education in public schools, but also in private, in Catholic schools, is a chance. It is not only a challenge, an obstacle that we have to we have to manage, but it is a chance. And you, I think yesterday, talked about that education is pastoral, has a pastoral dimension, is a pastoral activity. So if we underestimate it is a pity for the church itself. And regarding the consequences for theology, I think I will connect just to some colleagues who talked in this symposium already. It was talked about public theology. That is, I think, one of the consequences of this public discourse and the role of the church in the space of the school. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ivan?
Well, these days I was at home and I was watching my children from my brother, and they were using, the apps like TikTok and the YouTube, and there were those guys who were teaching them something, some skills, something that they were interested. And you were talking about some modern concepts around using media and video. But I'm thinking that we are late. Because we are very late. Because the kids already have their gurus, teachers, and we miss the train. Can we maybe instruct some teachers that could use this method, this, I would say, a new chance for a church? The traditional teachers learn us in school, and even today, but there a new power arising, I would say, internet power, how we wanted to say, the internet teachers, the teachers who will teach you about some other topics, but they are teachers about the religion, They talk, they don't have a degree, they don't have anything, but they influence on today children. And in one way we learn them in Catholic schools, in the confessional religion education. We learn them one thing, and then they come to home and they learn a whole other thing. So is there maybe in this department concept that would maybe make, I don't know, something interactive to use that children can also learn this way as the, I don't know, influencers or gurus use it? Or we will just stay on this concept of school learning and miss the train? I don't know.
Yes, the school is an ancient institution, and all the old institutions change very slowly. And that requires a complete change. An educator and famous educator with Croatian roots, Ivan Ilić, spoke about the deschooling of the society. He favored the learning in the reality, in the encounter with the reality, with different places, institutions, and so on. So I think we will return to the way of learning that is perhaps still characteristics for other cultures. You told yesterday about this, to reinvent education, connecting to your own roots. And I think in these digital tools, the background is narration. Narration always captures people, attention, and so. And I think the starting point of biblical message is narration of the history of salvation, and we have a lot of potential in narrating. It can be with images or movies. It can be just talk and narrate. It can be on examples. I observed this trend several decades ago in publicity. When I was a child, the publicity was in other way. And since a few decades, publicity became a small story of something that points then to attract you to buy something or to do something. So the media and the economy, they are clever to use the narration very fast, and I think we should not tend to superficially adopt this media, because it can be only another fun, another how do you say, zabava, entertainment. Thank you, and that is not that. That must have a content, must be deep, yes. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your lecture, thank you for the discussion, thank you for the questions. I think we have to learn to translate different narratives. not to pass and not to miss the train. But now we have to catch the train to our break. we have break until, what is it, 11? 11? I think 12 minutes is enough. Of course. We are fast drinkers, so. So, welcome everybody after the break. Let's start with the next session. Let me introduce to you our colleague Boni-Nicolas Richard Attaché. He's a postdoctoral Attaché. Genau, because he's German. He's German. Genau. He's a postdoctoral researcher at the Luxembourg School of Religion and Society in Luxembourg. He holds a licentiate degree in philosophy from the University of Calabi in Benin and a doctoral degree in philosophy from the Faculty of Theology of the University of Trier in Germany. And Trier is a place for excellent white wine.
Now we understand the why.
His doctoral thesis, and there's a connection to you. His doctoral thesis was focused on the poetillich. He's an expert in poetillich. Poetillich's understanding of power in the context of philosophical theories of power in the 20th century. And his lecture will be, as you already could read, Decolonial Perspectives on Religious Education and Citizenship, Considerations on Power. The power for the lecture is
So thank you so much. When I received the email from Sister Professor Anna Thea inviting me to make a presentation today in English, I must confess that I hesitated for a long time. For a long time to answer positively, because I'm not sure of my English. So I apologize. You will excuse the poverty of my English. So my lecture is about the colonial perspective on religious education and citizenship, consideration on power. And you have here the plan of my lecture. So, the question, the introduction is, how is Africa? How is Africa today? How is it the situation of Africa? And we know, not so bad, but not so good. Not so good because many problems that have beset sub-Saharan Africa for more than 60 years. Political, insecurity, instability, underdevelopment, food security, corruption, violence, war, foreign intervention in Mali, forced migration, epidemic, etc. are proof that the situation in Africa is not so good. So, two questions here. Is it this the product of a colonial, post-colonial continuum? Or should we say that the Africans are not able, structural, to lead their future? That's the question. So, in the first part, I will try to show how a certain understanding of power, comprehension of power, both on the part of the colonizers and on the part of a certain African head of state who associated them, could be called into question in the current situation in Africa. So that's the 2 points for the first part. As Nicholas Dix, a specialist in colonization, reminds us in his book entitled Colonial and Post-Colonial Histories, Colonization is Domination und Hegemony. In the classical form of political governance and economic control exercised by a state over territories and peoples outside. As we can see, to colonize means to dominate, to have power over the others. And the fact that the process of decolonization, which should mean the end of imperial domination by colonizing nations over colonized societies, was far from smooth, shows the will of the colonizer to continue to maintain a relationship of domination with the colonized. The form taken by the relationship between European countries and the so-called third world countries around the issue of official development assistance is a convincing illustration. One of the key concepts governing the new approach to relations between the European powers and their former colonies is indeed, especially since the Cold War, development. Countries classified under the new label of third world are considered by Western countries as backward and in need of development assistance. So a new distinction between developed and developing countries emerged, a distinction that closely resembles to the one between colonizing and colonized countries during the period of colonial empires. However, recent research has revealed many ambiguities and tensions in this new development regime. For example, in order to receive development assistance from one of the two superpowers, the United States and its Western allies, and on the one hand, and the Soviet Union and its Eastern European allies on the other, the leader of the third world countries had to take a clear stand for or against communism. And government suspected of being pro-communist by the United States and its allies were subject to sanctions or overthrown. And the assassination of the Prime Minister of a newly independent Democratic Republic of Congo, Patrice Lumumba, is very much in this context. Development assistance is therefore rarely aimed at solving the problems of structural inequalities between rich developed and poor developing countries. The development projects often serve to maintain asymmetrical power relations between Western countries and others. Decolonization has therefore in no way meant the breaking of the links of domination, subordination. If on the donor side, development assistance maintains a superficial and instrumental approach that makes power a simple means of domination, this assistance also serves among certain African heads of state to consolidate a king of sacred conception of power. This brings me to the second point of this part. Not yet. So a second sacred approach to power in Africa. We cannot talk about political power in some African countries without referring to a sacred conception of power, as the Congolese philosopher and theologian Kamana pointed out. This sacred conception of power is rooted in the collective imagination and refers to the traditional royal conception of authority, according to which the king's power comes from God. That is therefore sacred. So the king exercises an authority in principle, an Autorität aus Prinzip. As Tillich puts it, when many states, mainly in West, East, and Central Africa, gained political independence, many of the first heads of state in these countries had no other idea of their power than that of a king. Naturally, in the pathological sense of the word. They believe that their power comes from God. As such, they could not tolerate any criticisms. It is not necessary to go into detail here about the problems that such a conception of power has for economic structures and development in Africa. Let us simply point out that this pathological conception of power has led for many years to dictatorial and corrupt regimes. And the advent of democracy in the 1919s on the African continent did not fundamentally change the situation. On the contrary, democratic movements had led to so-called hybrid regimes, the regime hybrid. Their electoral systems are mostly non-competitive, as they do not lead to a change of government, which in turn are characterized by a lack of freedom due to highly personified power, nepotism, and clientelism. This point cannot be over-emphasized. The pathological understanding of power, of Secret power is one of the major causes of development problem in our country, in our continent. And here we must aid the role that development aid, official development assistance, l'aide au développement, plays in this state of affairs. Not only do the funds allocated full corruption, but they are also used by some corrupt and despotic governments to consolidate their power. They buy weapons to maim the people in the country where freedom does not exist, where the right of citizens to participate in the essential decisions about their future is denied, where the country's wealth belongs to a minority, sustainable development is not to be accepted. To be able to promote its development, Africa needs credible political authority, geglaubte Autoritäten, who show the way, as Jaspers put it. An ontological approach to power could be a crucial importance here. So, an ontological analysis of power. The instrumental approach to power discussed above refers to the common definitions of power, most often of sociological origin. We can simply recall Max Weber's definition of power. He says, power means any change within a social relationship to have one's own way, even in the face of opposition. And Bertrand Russell said on power, power is the ability to produce intended effect. With regard to what the American and German philosopher and theologian Paul Tillich calls the ontology of power, there's approaches which start from the phenomenon of power in order to establish a definition seem too limited. For in order to better analyze the phenomenon of power, it is important to delve into its essence. And delving into the essence of power can help to avoid any confusions, any deviation in this regard. And this essence lies at a deeper level than its various phenomenological forms, whether in the politic, social, psychic, cognitive, as knowledge is power, or religious domain. Ultimately, the essence of power is ontologically based. The concept of power is indeed founded in the structure of being. According to Tillich, power is something that power is not something that is added to being at a later time. Because when we think of being as such, of being as poor being, we also at the same time thinking of power. So that being and power are interchangeable concepts. They are convertible into each other. Tillich speaks in this sense of being as the power to be, or power of being. to clarify the meaning of the term power to be or power of being, Tillich writes that it refers to the power to resist and to dominate non-being. And this explanation calls for two comments. First, that the power of being is not manifested in the conflict and confrontation between the various beings, each of which tries to dominate and enslave the others. Otherwise, the world would be governed by the law of jungle, by the struggle to the death between different powers of being. Tillich certainly does not ignore the division, the opposition between different powers of beings. He points them out, analyzes them, takes them into account. However, these clashes have more to do with existential alienation than with fundamental ontological structure. Indeed, each individual being participates in being itself. In this deepest reality and in this ultimate truth, being is harmonious, symphonic, and non-discordant. This implies that there is a possible understanding or concord between beings, that the self-assertion of some is not necessary at the expense of others. With regard to Nietzsche, Tillich notices that the will to power, der Wille zur Macht, is not the will to dominate. He carefully distinguishes between force and constraints that crush and those that help, that liberate. The power of some those not negate, limit, or destroy the power of others. Then it is manifested in an authentic way. On the contrary, it promotes and increases them. The power of being does not, therefore, refer to the quarrels and antagonists between the various beings, but to the tension between being and non-being. And this is the second commentary, or the second comment on this Tillich statement about power as the power to be. The power to be is indeed the force that overcomes the opposition, the resistance of non-being. And here, non-being is not to be understood as non-dialectical non-being in the sense of permanent, hook on, that means poor nothingness, but rather a dialectical non-being in the sense of a Platonic meon, which has a relation to being. It has a dialectical relation to being, from which it derives and it depends, to which, unlike hook on, is not alien but hostile. Paradoxically, it draws its reality and its power from what it wants to destroy, to dislove. To use an image, we can compare relative non-being to a cancer, crabs, that needs the organism to the organism eat undermines, feed on its strength, and which will die with it. Its victory will kill it. So the power of being is in this way. So the power of being in this way gives rise to being. I repeat, the power of being this way gives rise to being and prevents it from being overcome, destroyed it. Tillich therefore makes non-being the root of all that is living, because being is alive thanks to be non-being that is contained and that pushes it to be. Otherwise, it will be closed. It will not be something. L'être sans le non-être, il est mort. Sein ohne Nichtsein ist tot. In this sense, being without non-being is dead, says Tillich. He adds, the more the living is able to carry the non-being within itself, the more it is in danger, but the more power it has to be if it is able to overcome this danger. This has existential implications, which I would now like to dwell on briefly. So, being and non-being, existential implication. So, oh yeah, okay, good. Ja, nee, das ist mein Computer, das ist anders. Noch ein bisschen far von mir. Not this, aber it's good. So, being and non-being, existential implications. Tillich illustrates his statement in his article, The Philosophy of Power, by taking the example of a people of Berlin when he writes, from time to time, people, both in Berlin, that they were more open and livelier than, for example, West Germany. And they boast about it with good reason. If you ask, why is it so? The answer can only be because here people have to carry and overcome more non-being. One has more power to be because one has more non-being to overcome. And as long as one can overcome it. The difficult living conditions which Tillich identifies here with non-being, to which people were exposed in Berlin at the time and which had to be overcome, need no further explanation here. It is perhaps sufficient, it is enough to think of the living conditions of people in many African countries. If we considered the migration flow from Africa to Europe with all the risks involved in crossing the Mediterranean, we can image the reality in the countries of origin of the refugees. The Black continent then appears as the continent of all misery. And yet, many African countries are rich in raw materials, which we do not need to list here. Let us simply remember that Africa alone has almost 30% of all the world's raw materials. Moreover, as we have seen, a lot of development assistance has been given to Africa over the past 60 years. And yet, Africa does not seem to be taking off. Given Tilly's example above of Berlin, and his assertion that a life process is all the more powerful the more it is able to integrating more non-being into self-affirmation without being destroyed in the process, could Africa's situation be interpreted as an expression of limited power of being, as found in some of racial philosophical theories that fit into certain economic systems? In the name of economic interest, some world powers are indeed making race and major issue in the establishment of a world system. The global distribution of labor and trade and racism are integral parts of the capitalism system, where North and South assume socio-political and strategic meanings, but far from being an expression of structural defect of stereotypical black man surrendering to the cyclical rhythm of the nature, the state of Africa, the fate of Africa, its backward condition should not make us lose sight of the fact that political power should allow the realization of the power of being of each man or each social group. And that is therefore important for economic development. In African countries, however, political power, whether internal or external, very often proves to be an obstacle to development. Besides the pathological understanding of sacred power among some politicians and the resulting dictatorial political regiments, let me return once again to the influence of foreign policy on domestic policy decisions in African countries. Speaking on neocolonialism, Kwame Nkrumah said, the essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subject to it is theoretical independent, has all the insignia of sovereignty on the international plane, but in reality, its economy and therefore its politics are manipulated from outside. The hope placed in the Year of Africa, 1960, and expressed in many independence celebrations was indeed yearly undermined, as we have said, by the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. 1987, the revolutionary Thomas Sankara, dubbed by the media as the African Che Guevara, was overthrown and assassinated in Burkina Faso. It is not uncommon to hear reports of the direct involvement or co-responsibility of major political powers in this assassination and in war and conflict in Africa. In the early 2000s, the Belgian government appointed a commission of inquiry to determine responsibility for the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. 41 years after his assassination, Belgium, the former colonial power, has made an official apology to the victims, families, and the people of what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo for its part in the death of Patrice Lumumba. One of his thieves taken back to Belgium as a war trophy by one of his killers, a Belgian soldier, was recently returned to the Congolese government by the Belgian government. Considering that the Democratic Republic of Congo is still today, as we know, a country in crisis, and that many other bearers of hope have been murdered in many other African countries with presumed external help, we realize how external political power can destroy the realization of the power of being of a social group. It is here that Tilly's ontological understanding of justice as a respect of the power of being of the others reveals itself as a call, not only to African politicians, but also to the great powers that support dictatorial regimes out of a tactic interest. So, yes, ethic of power, or power in the context of justice. In a discussion with a friend, I was recently invited to a conference on the problem of development in Africa. When I arrived in the conference room, I was surprised to be the only African, and yet we wanted to talk about Africa. The speaker, who has held senior position in international institutions in Africa, summed his statement up as follows: Africa needs development assistance. And I asked him, which Africa are you talking about? And which assistance development do you mean? If you are talking about Africa with such a rich soil that we are talking about a geological scandal, and if you are talking about development assistance as we have known it until now, it seems to me that the diagnostic of your presentation is wrong. For this Africa I have just spoken about does not need assistance, help in this form, but rather justice. Bernard Velte, following Blaise Pascal, presented law as a transcendent idea inherent in the internal constitutive principle of power, and spoke of it as the soul of human power. And I would like to try to explain what Welte says here, once again, from an ontological point of view, as has been the case since the beginning of these studies. We have indeed spoken of being as the power to be. Here, justice is the form in which the power of being of each person is realized in the encounter with others. Justice is the respect of the other's right to be. In an encounter, the you in front of me presents itself to me as a claim, a Forderung, exigence, says Tillich, in the sense that the you is the limit, the Grenze, the limit of the I. The being of the you inwardly claims justice, the recognition of the other as a person. We can, of course, try to dismiss this claim. We can try to turn man into an object, a thing, an instrument, but in justice to others, the non-recognition of their dignity as self is always also injustice to ourselves, to oneself. And what is valid here in the encounter between individuals is also valid in the relationship between a state and its citizens, as well as in the relationships between states. So, for example, a state acts unjustly when it dehumanizes people, when it deprives them of what they self-fulfillment demands, when it deprives them of their power to be as persons. Such a state destroys itself. So, I come now to the third part, emerging from the great night, but how? Since the beginning of this symposium, there has been regular discussion, obviously with good reason, of civic and religious education as a means of improving the well-being of our populations. But from a colonial perspective, a decolonial perspective, how can this be done effectively when we know that our education system is dependent on the colonial system? How can we deconstruct a system that is set according to Western parameters? How can we emerge from the great night, as Achille Mbembe aptly put it, alongside African writer who claim a global cultural background, such as Tambuzo, Marechera, Kosi Efwe, Elashao Kosi Ogi, and many others, often from the diaspora. A movement of emergence in African languages is being created on a militant basis. Between these two positions, Walter Mignolo's notions of border thinking seems to me to be quite suggestive. Instead of rejecting Western models, border epistemologists want to reinvest the Eurocentric emancipatory rhetoric of modernity on the basis of indigenous cosmology and the philosophy of self. Border thinking takes up and re-cementerizes the notions of world system and citizenship, how to live the world system which is not anti-modern but trans-modern. Edouard Glissant speaks oft about, to speak of epistemic diversality. So as an approach, borderland thinking challenges the subject Africa and invokes paradigms of African philosophy in order to decompartmentalize an epistemology that, instead of rejecting the Western model, integrates it and opens itself for the varieties of the world. This has political implication. So, political implication, David Abernethy, who has researched colonization in sub-Saharan Africa, asks that from the 50th century onwards, Europeans distinguished themselves by launching a three-pronged assault on other societies, on indigenous institutions of governance, on ancient pattern of production and the distribution of economic research, and on the ideas and values that give meaning to life. In terms of political governments, we have already mentioned that we called the wind of democracies in the 1990s. Democracy was supposed to be the magic cure for all our world. But some 30 years later, have people's living conditions changed in Africa? After dozens of democratic elections, what has been achieved? Third, we have recently seen 3 military coups at the putsch in West Africa in the space of 4 months. Putsches that were paradoxically welcomed by the populations. 2, some nations have even fallen into civil war. And third, as imposed by the system of election, regularly organized at great expense. In 2019, the presidential and legislative election cost in Mali a little over 76 million euros. And this to renew a president who had already been in office for 5 years. 3 years later, he was overthrown. This sum corresponds to more than 10 reference hospitals that the population really needs. Hospitals that they will never have. In Cameroon, a little more than 82 million euros were spent for the presidential elections to renew a president who has been in office since 1982. Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. Good. So, however, when we look at the figures of the development indeed, the population is disillusioned. The economic and the social situation has deteriorated almost everywhere. In the face of all these failures, we must ask ourselves, is it the kind of democracy that the continent really needs? Is not time for Africa to assume political responsibility for itself by adopting political governance at the borders that draws as much on intated models as a traditional institution of governance? Let us return to the king's authority, which has already been discussed in this work. Although in our societies the king exercised authority in principle, he is not beyond criticism in many West and East African peoples, such in the Yoruba peoples in Nigeria and Benin, or the Akan people in Ghana, Togo, and Cote d'Ivoire. Power does not reside in the person of the king or ruler, but symbolical in the share. So in these peoples, importance is attached to the seat of power as a symbol of a unity of the people and of power, and as the seat of a people's soul. The king is certainly in power for life and cannot be removed, but in case of misconduct, he may be symbolically punished by being removed from the seat for a certain period of time. For as a chief of the land, or master of the land, or owner of the land, he is the one who manages and allocates the land and the rights of use in the name of ancestor. And as such, he must be a role model. Let us just say this: service to the state should be the top priority of rulers, as is it in traditional for the kings. Instead of conclusion, let us say that we wanted to try to lay the philosophical foundation of civic and religious education from some ontological considerations on power, on the problem of power. Power is first a power of being which calls the respect. In encounter, the you in front of me presents itself to me as a clam. This means that you is the limit of I. Is it not the basis of all civic and religious education? So thank you for your attention. So,
thanks a lot for your lecture. As we could see, power is related to time. Time is always an ontological reason. Time flies. We have time for 2 questions.
So I have a request. In order to answer the question, maybe in French or Germany, I can also.
I could translate it to German.
Okay, good. Good. Yeah. Yeah. La question était formulée avant le cours.
It's more easy for you.
I promised yesterday that I will ask you a question. Thank you very much for your lecture.
Thank you.
As always, the philosophers are very comprehensible. I think your lecture is in many ways very interesting. Of course, you get into some kind of metaphysics, ontology of power, and you try to retransmit that in the African context, in the reality. I think the material of your lectures would be an excellent article.
And
an excellent article. Because for me, it's an absolutely new way to thinking this kind of problematics in the concrete and sociological African context. But my question is getting another point. I don't know how you are familiar with the woke movement. The woke movement in USA. The woke movement is promoting some kind of inverse power. The woke movement promotes the power of, they call the victims, the minorities, the dominated, black people first of all, then other immigrants in the Occidental societies, Chinese and others, but also the population of women, and also the population of LGBT and so on. So the ideology of the woke movement is to inverse power. The oppressed today should have the legitimacy to rule over the majority. Do you understand my question? My way of thinking? So when we speak in Occident about the decolonization, the last 30, 40 years, it's a positive concept. Because it supposes some kind of self-criticism from the Occidental. And it supposes also a respect about the integrity of the other culture. But the woke movement are going in another extreme. It just inversed power based on the resentment, on vengeance. Do you understand? So my question is, you as an African, and you have an European concept, you have an European experience. What do you think about this inverse power in, for example, in woke movement? Is it this kind of revenge against the Occidental domination on Africa? Is it a good way to do that? How do you explain the appearance of this movement? For me, it's an expression of the frustration of young people who didn't get integrated in USA and now today more and more in Europe. What do you think about that? Because it's another extreme. But my second question is, as an African, is there something positive that the colonization brings to Africa? And you that in Africa you can build on to develop your countries, your cultures. I don't know if I was clear.
Okay. Alors, I will answer you in French, it's better. Là, après, vous pouvez traduire pour que je puisse bien répondre à la question qu'il a posée. Voilà. So, I apologize. Alors, le pouvoir est d'abord une question de rencontre. Ça, c'est sûr. Rencontre, parce que quand je suis cloisonné, je ne peux pas savoir quelle capacité de pouvoir j'ai. Ok, donc pouvoir, il y a deux choses qui sont importantes. Pouvoir comme pouvoir d'être, donc le sens dont nous avons parlé, et l'autre, la rencontre. Ça, c'est forcé. Sans la rencontre, je ne peux pas savoir ma capacité. Sans la rencontre entre deux pouvoirs d'être, personne ne peut savoir qui il est en réalité. Autrement, d'ailleurs, on se meurt. Maintenant, renverser le pouvoir, quand on se rencontre, l'essentiel ici, ce n'est pas de dominer l'autre encore une fois. C'est plutôt qu'ensemble, on se relève. C'est pourquoi chez Tillich, les extrêmes ne sont pas bienvenus. Les extrêmes ne sont pas bienvenus. Ils réfléchissent toujours en termes de corrélation. Voilà. De corrélation. Ouais. L'un sans l'autre n'a pas de substance. n'a pas d'être substantielle. Et donc, ces mouvements aux États-Unis, à mon avis, vont se mourir d'eux-mêmes. Parce qu'il n'y aura pas il n'y aura pas de l'autre côté. Ils vont se retrouver seuls, en fait. Ils vont se retrouver seuls. Je ne sais pas si oui. Ça n'a pas d'avenir, en réalité, à mon avis. Bon, maintenant, par rapport à l'Afrique, si la colonisation est une, je vais dire, est appréciée positivement ou pas, encore une fois, en termes de rencontres, bien évidemment, en termes de rencontres, mais comme nous l'avons dit, ce qui a dominé pendant toutes ces années dans la colonisation, c'est plutôt la domination. C'est plutôt la domination. On domine pour pomper le sous-sol des autres pays. C'est juste pour des intérêts économiques et égoïstes. Ce n'est pas pour le bien, en réalité. Tout n'est pas mauvais, puisque à un moment donné, il faut construire école, il faut construire... Bon, on a fait, d'accord. Mais en réalité, la colonisation en elle-même n'est pas positive, ça c'est sûr. C'est de la domination. C'est une longue histoire, puisque même le pape, à un moment donné, tout un pape a donné l'autorisation à des colons d'aller voilà, aller baptiser ces sauvages-là. Toute l'Église aussi, vous voyez. Voilà.
Okay, is there another question?
So,
I will translate in Croatia very briefly to my colleagues. Govorio sam o walk pokretu, ne znam jeste li čuli za taj walk pokret koji je sve više prisutan u Europi, koji ističe prava manjina, crnaca i to u jednom vrlo negativnom smislu da zapravo se demonizira sve što je bijelo, sve što je zapadnjačko. To je potpuno dekonstrukcija zapravo zapadne civilizacije koja ne donosi ništa novoga. I to dolazi uglavnom iz ljevičarskih, krajnje liberalnih struja, afroameričkih i tako dalje. I pitao sam kolegu, evo kako on kao Afrikanac u Europi, kao filozof, gleda na taj zapravo obrnutu moć. I on je rekao zapravo da moć ovdje u kontekstu njegovog predavanja je bazirana na susret. I da treba izbjegavati krajnosti. I on smatra da taj će pokret, zato što nije sposoban učiniti susret, da će on izumrijeti iz njega samoga. A s druge strane, moje drugo pitanje je bilo, evo, da li Afrikanci ipak, unatoč loše strane kolonijalizacije, nešto mogu izvući pozitivnoga od toga, na čemu mogu graditi budućnost. I ipak je odgovorio da kolonijalizacija ipak ima negativan prizvuk u Africi. I s druge strane sam ja onda odgovorio, ali onda i kršćanstvo, kako se širilo u Africi, je zapravo religija oni koji dominiraju. I sad to trebaš se onda odnositi prema tome. I'm sorry. Thank you very much. A question, Jean Paul?
This kind of understanding Christianity as a religion of dominant culture. I think it is clear that. Sorry.
Christianity in Africa, is it a religion which must be understood as a religion from the colonializer? Yes. Mm-hmm. In that kind, there are many African scholars, Ebusi Bolaga, Achille Mbembe, and so on, who defend that Christianity in itself, it's a good religion. But the conditions in which Christianity arrived in Africa was the worst. And I agree with this, the last one.
Right. Okay, maybe this is a final word for this session. Thanks a lot for your lectures. Thanks a lot for your questions. So now we have a break. We have lunch at 12:15 at the restaurant, so we have to hurry up a little bit. And then maybe you will do some announcements for the afternoon.
So.
Thanks for the presenters. We will go to lunch now, and we will go together down. We should be